Thank you. Joe Manchin, for those of you who don't know, is a senator from West Virginia and formerly governor, a longtime friend of mine, and someone I genuinely admire. And his state's had a tough time the last several years, economically and socially. We are here today to talk about this epidemic of prescription drugs morphing into heroin, which has swept across America, touched every home in our country virtually. I have had the sad responsibility over the last couple of years to call 5 people who were good friends of Hillary's and mine whose children died in various fashions as a consequence of this. But we must not forget the fact that it's been most heavily concentrated in economically and socially distressed areas that are more likely, and I think it's the only epidemic in my lifetime, more likely to be concentrated in small towns and rural areas. And so I will turn it over to Joe by sort of trying to end on a high note. Shortly before the Congress kind of recessed for the summer, the United States Senate voted, 94-1 or something like that, to basically treat this like a public health epidemic and not a criminal problem, with more mental health and more treatment. The funding has not been forthcoming, but I think it will be. It is, of all the various issues being debated in America today, probably the one that has the greatest potential to generate a bipartisan response and bring us together as a country. And Joe's been on the forefront of it, so we're just going to have a little conversation today about what he's doing, what's going on in West Virginia, what's going on in the rest of the country, and what all of you can and should be doing in your home areas to maximize our response. Senator?
Mr. President, I want to thank you, first of all, for giving me this forum, but basically, you and Hillary are the first ones that stood up on a national level and identified that we've got a problem. An epidemic, so you know, we've lost 200,000 Americans have died since 1999 by legal prescription abuse. Legal. And you have to understand, this thing got out of the bag back in the 80s when we identified as pain as one of the 5 elements of wellness. Started with the VA, if you can believe that. So all you had to do was look at 2 things. First of all, why do you have some of the highest unemployment in a category of your veterans? How could a veteran not be employable? Think about it. They come back, they got skill sets, they're disciplined, but they've been impaired because they can get about anything they want when they're deployed for duty. Unbelievable. And come back, PTSD, having problems and all this back. And then if you look at my state of West Virginia, I've fallen below 50% of the adults, basically, who should be working, that are working. I'm below the 50% level of adults. So 3 things happens in your life if you're not working and you're adult and you're capable and able. You're either not skill sets, you've either been incarcerated and have a record, or you're impaired. You're addicted, or a combination of those. So first of all, I'm as guilty as any other person in public office of looking at this as a crime back 20 years ago. And we finally come, by putting him in jail, didn't solve a thing. We didn't cure anybody. We didn't help anybody. We didn't get them ready for life again. We kind of threw them to the wayside because they had a criminal record and they're still addicted. So now we're looking at it as an illness. Well, if you have an illness, you need treatment. Guess what? There's no treatment centers. In my state of West Virginia, I had 60,000 people couldn't get treatment last year. 60,000. 4,000 were kids. Could not get treatment. There's no place to send them. How would you like to be a parent? The only way you can get your child help is to hope they get picked up for a crime and get incarcerated and put them in drug court. It's the only treatment they have. So something's wrong in America, and we're talking about it, so I keep thinking, what can we do? So I have a bill that I've introduced called Lifeboat. Remember that, Lifeboat. And it's exactly what it says. It's a lifeboat. It's trying to catch you and save you. And what it does, it says we're going to have, every time I talk, people always say, well, we can't pay for this and we can't pay for that. You have to have pay-fors for everything. So I said, how about if we put 1 penny, just 1 penny, a fee, a tax, call it whatever you want to, but basically a 1 penny fee on every milligram of opiate produced in America and sold in America. That'll produce $1.5 to $2 billion a year. That gives us permanent funding for every penny of that to go to treatment centers around America. We can start basically curing the illness that we have. So we've asked for that. And it's called Lifeboat. And I've got to get some of my Republican friends to sign up. And I said, listen, I'll stand with you toe to toe. I'll go campaign for you. And if you think this is a Democrat and Republican issue, I'm sorry. There's not one of us in this room, not one of you sitting here today that doesn't know somebody in your family, extended family, or a very close friend that hasn't been affected with legal prescription drug abuse. And that's what we're dealing with. We're losing generations. Next of all, we have another bill called Jesse's Law. I'm going to throw this one at you, and Mr. President, he knows about this. He came down, and he knows my state as well as I know it. But this man who I served in the legislature with, state legislature, his daughter, Jessie, 30 years of age, she got addicted. She had a sexual assault when she was in college. She came home depressed, got on some medication, and from there it just digressed down. And she overdosed a couple of times. They had her in so many treatment centers. But she finally was clean for 6 months, and she was a competitive runner. She had an injury to her hip. They took her to the hospital. And in the hospital, if you go in and you're allergic to penicillin or something, they'll stamp it so they don't want you to have a reaction. But because of HIPAA laws and privacy, we couldn't do anything on this. So her parents go with her and says, my daughter's a recovering addict. She's been clean for 6 months, recovering addict. She tells them, I'm a recovering addict, so please be very cautious, okay? Now, they've both been warned in the hospital. Nothing's marked on her records as she goes through. So she goes there for treatment. She's there for a few days. She gets an operation. She had some inflammatory, and they were treating the inflammation. They put a port to where they were treating her with antibiotics. The discharging doctor did not know at all. No one ever told him that she was a recovering addict. And he gives her a prescription for OxyContin. She goes home. She gets a pill. She gets them filled, prescription. She used 10 of them, crushed them and used them and shot them up in the port. The port was there. She called her parents and she says, I'm going to lay down and rest. She said, I'm real tired. And she passed away that evening. So we have a bill called Jesse's Law. And Jesse's Law simply does this. If you're a guardian or if you're a parent and your child is basically both agreeing to say, please, I am a recovering addict or I'm an addict and I want you to treat me as such, then it'll be stamped. And just as common sense, you would think it's already being done, right? It's not. This is common sense. That's another piece of legislation, and we're working on Jesse's Law. But Lifeboat can really save a lot of people's life. The third thing that we're working on having a harder time is this sentencing. We've got to give a pathway for an addict, a pathway to get back into civilization. So if it's a nonviolent crime, if it's a non-sexual crime, it's probably more or less a larceny crime because an addict will start stealing from their family first. They'll steal from their relatives. They'll steal from the family's friends, and then it moves out into the neighborhood and everywhere else. And they get picked up, and they'll get a criminal record. They usually get a felony for grand larceny. These people have no way to get back, and basically, if you talk to the recovering addicts, unless they have just a strong constitution, there's no reason. So we're saying this: if you go through an accredited recovery, and that's a minimum of 1 year, and you become a mentor for another year, that you're committed to cleanliness, then you're available to go through a review board of the peers in your in your area of the state, wherever you may live in the country, to recommend you for a one-time expungement of your record. You got a one shot. Expunges your record completely, gets you back into mainstream. You don't have a criminal record against you. And of course, you have to remain clean wherever you go, but basically it gives them back. We got to get people back into the workforce. So these are things we're working on, and we're telling people. I lost 630 West Virginians died last year. 630 died, the highest mortality rate in the nation as far as per capita. And it's just devastating in the schools and everything. And when you go down and you talk to 5th and 6th and 7th graders, and I used to, as governor, I would go talk to them, or as senator, and then afterwards they'll say, can we talk to you privately? And they start telling you what's going on in their home. This one little girl, 12 years of age, I'll leave it at that, and then we'll go into it, Mr. President. She says, Mr. Senator, she says, my dad got hurt in the mines, and he got hooked on opiates, on drugs. We lost the family. We lost my mom and my dad got divorced. We lost our home. We lost everything. Then my mother took up with another gentleman. She was going to get married to him. He was addicted also. She didn't want to have her kids in an addicted home. She was trying to get away from him. He took Oxycontin and cooked it and shot her up. And the little girl watched this happen. He says he didn't give her just one needle, Mr. Senator. He shot her twice with 2 needles to make sure she died. 12-year-old girl tell you that. And you think, they had to see this and watch it. And you're living with it. And it's everywhere. And we're not doing anything about it. And we're still playing politics with it. But this is an epidemic that has to be cured. So I don't, the Mr. President gives me a form that where you all know what's going on. There's some bills out there you can help us with. The lifeboat is one that's going to be absolutely desperately needed if we're ever going to find the treatment that people need. And also the empathy and sympathy to get people back into the mainstream. They can be cured. It's an illness and it can be cured.
Yeah, you do have, we were talking about on the way in, the judge that I went to see.
Judge Will Thompson.
In southern West
Boone
Virginia.
County,
So
West Virginia.
tell him what he does so that everybody will realize there's an upside to this. There is a right way and a wrong way to deal with this.
Well, he has a drug court. Next time you do, I'm going to bring a little girl here from, she's not little anymore, and her daddy was mayor in this town, and Judge Thompson. Judge Thompson put her in every jail he could put her in. She was
What
so
town
bad.
was it?
It's in Madison, West Virginia. Madison. Wonderful little coal community and everything, but the little girl will tell you, 12 years of age, she started using drugs with her friend who was using them with their parents. And just occasional. And it starts out with recreational marijuana. 90% of them will tell you this. And it got worse and worse and worse. So Will kept saying, he put her in this, put her in this, put her in this. She finally broke down one day. He locked her up and he wasn't letting her out. And she had broke down and she said, I've got to do something with my life. And she started. So she went to drug court. I don't know if you all know drug court. It takes about a year to get through it. And it's really tough. And they have to come and they have to do so much community work and this and that and everything. Well, needless to say, this little girl now has got her college degree, and now she's starting her own rehabilitation center. She has no support whatsoever. She's not accredited, but she knows more about what goes on in the streets than anybody in any clinical research department. And she's the most fantastic young person you've ever met. We're going to get her here before you, but he gets them. And they come into his court, and you heard Will, and he brought that whole group to you. And he basically makes them. He stays on top of them. He'll put them back in jail. He doesn't give them any second chance. He says, I'm giving you a chance to get your life straight. And he'll bring him into court. He brings him back on a weekly basis. Then he has a graduation with ceremony. The family comes. It's like a big college graduation because it's such a feat to get through this. But drug court's the only thing that can save some of these kids. It's the only rehabilitation they have. He has counselors for them. He makes them work. Makes them be responsible. He makes them go to high schools and talk to kids to try to keep them from getting addicted. And he just will not, and he will not accept, and they're going to push him. I know the feds are pushing him hard. The methadone clinics, Suboxone and all that, he's not for any of that. He says, all you're doing is extending this illness and extending the dependency. But it's just something.
The thing that impressed me when I talked to him was, and he brought a young man to see me who was a 2-sport letterman, an honor student. All of a sudden, he's totally hooked and lost everything, and now he'd clawed his way back to school. He's really tough on sending him back to the local jail, but he's been determined to keep people out of the state penitentiary, which is crazy. We've got to start treating this like a public health problem and aggressively intervene, and I was so impressed by what he had done. I say this to all of you because I ask you first to support all three of the initiatives that Senator Manchin mentioned, and second, to use him and his office as a resource if you are trying to establish community treatment facilities in response in where you live. I have been all over this country, and it is, epidemic everywhere, but it's more pronounced there than other places. I would also like to remind you all that I think this is why we should be trying to get young people out of prison and into the workforce. A lot of these people who are dying of these overdoses, if I talked to Chelsea about this because this is her field, is public health. If you read an academic article about why white working class Americans of a certain age have their life expectancy declining, if you read a public health, they'd say, it's this drug problem, and it's alcoholism, and it's suicide. And for the first time in 50 years, women's smoking rates are as high as men. And then there are the consequences of diabetes. But really, they're dying of a broken heart. And these kids are. And we need some time to give them something to believe in better than the dead ends they faced. And in the meanwhile, we need to pass what Joe Manchin's trying to do. So I ask you to support him, and I ask you to use his office as a community resource if you think you live in a place that's got a bigger problem than you're dealing with.
Let me say one more thing if I can. The culture has to change in Washington. The Food and Drug Administration is where that's where my battle's going on right now. There's no more opiates are needed on the market. If they bring a new opiate on the market, basically, and they're going to bring it in so it can't be abused, which they call it deterrent, and it'll be like in gel form, don't you think they ought to take one or two off that were in basically single source form? They never believed that was their responsibility. They basically said if a pharmaceutical told them what the drug did and it did everything it said it was going to do, they've done their job. I said, don't you think you ought to know what the effects are to the public, what it's been doing? I said, when Purdue Pharma brought out OxyContin, they said it was a wonder drug, 24-hour pain relief, no addiction back in the 80s. Well, we've seen what's happened since then. So we've got to hold people accountable and responsible, and that's all we're trying to do. But the FDA does not need to bring anything else. The Veterans Administration, here's 3 ways we can fight it. VA, Medicaid, Medicare. Those are the 3 largest health care providers in the world. If they just said, Fern, we're not going to basically appeal for a primary care for pain. We're going to try alternative care first. If it doesn't work, then we'll try something different. And there's so many alternative ways of treating pain. And those of you who are old enough, you didn't have this product back in the 60s and the 70s or the 50s. It wasn't there. It didn't happen until the 80s. So we can do it, but it's going to take a real constitution from all of us. But if you all can keep pressure on the FDA, and if you keep in touch with my office, we'll tell you where the pressure points are, but we're trying to change them, and it's not an easy ship to turn right now.
Let's give him a big hand. We'll go on with the program. Thank you.